Many people harbor a curious misconception, believing that a deeper spiritual journey or awakening will somehow exempt them from life's challenges. In fact, the opposite often proves true. As one grows in awareness and capacity, challenges may even intensify, not because life becomes harsher, but because the individual is now better equipped to confront and understand them. This evolution isn't about floating in perpetual bliss. Rather, it often ushers in profound shifts. And one of the most striking of these is the surprising difficulty in falling in love in the conventional sense. The familiar, intoxicating rush, the fervent anticipation, the delicate dramas and heartfelt expressions of old romance. All these begin to feel strangely unconvincing. It's not that the capacity for love itself diminishes. Far from it. Awakened love tends to be richer, more profound, and quieter. But the well-worn dance of projection and pursuit, a staple of traditional romance, simply loses its appeal. Once you've glimpsed the deeper truths, you cannot unsee them. You come to understand that much of what society labels as romance is, at its core, often an unspoken agreement between two individuals, each seeking to fill a void within themselves. Once this subtle trick is identified, its power to enchant is significantly diminished. So, one finds themselves alive, brimming with wonder, yet simultaneously unable to engage with love in the manner society has long prescribed. What we commonly refer to as falling in love is iba, in reality, a peculiar form of self-hypnosis. You encounter someone, and almost immediately, the mind begins to weave an intricate web, a tapestry spun from personal memories, deeply held desires, and unconscious projections. Before long, you are no longer relating to the authentic person standing before you, but to this elaborate creation of your own imagination. It is then, intoxicated by this self-crafted illusion, that many declare, "I am in love." This phenomenon is often reinforced by cultural narratives, from fairy tales to romantic comedies, which continually feed us idealized versions of love that emphasize grand gestures and dramatic tension over genuine, unvarnished connection. The media, in its relentless pursuit of captivating stories, often glorifies relationships built on longing and external validation, unwittingly conditioning us to seek similar experiences. A curious aspect of this so-called love is its reliance not on presence, but on absence. It frequently burns brightest when the beloved is distant, when uncertainty looms, or when one is immersed in the delicious torment of longing. It's a love that draws sustenance from hunger, rather than from a sense of wholeness. It is, in an essence, a sweet madness. The ego, ever so cunning, is remarkably adept at disguising its own loneliness. It adorns it with the label passion, dressing it in eloquent words and tremulous glances. Yet, at its core, the message is a plea. I am incomplete, and I yearn for you to make me whole. This isn't love, it is need. And as long as love is conflated with need, it will flicker precariously, sustained only by the constant fuel of insecurity. This dynamic is observable in various relationship patterns, often explored in psychological attachment theory, where insecure attachment styles, anxious, preoccupied, or fearful avoidant, can drive individuals to seek external validation or completion, rather than relating from a place of self-sufficiency. Such patterns highlight the underlying anxieties that prevent true, unburdened connection. Much of what we've been taught to admire as romance is precisely this: a subtle exchange, an unspoken pact. I will soothe your emptiness if you will soothe mine. This explains why, once the initial intoxication wanes, so many individuals find themselves disillusioned, questioning whether they ever truly loved or simply entered into a silent, emotional transaction. Awakening, however, is not a mystical, obscure event. It is simply the moment when the metaphorical veil lifts, revealing the intricate machinery behind the entire performance: the self, the ego, desire, and the endless games they orchestrate. You begin to recognize how your previous perceptions of love were often deeply intertwined with a fear of solitude, with profound longing, and with layers of projection. When this realization dawns, it becomes impossible to plunge into such relationships with the same blind abandon. The enchantment breaks, not because love itself is rejected, but because its counterfeit forms are now seen for what they truly are. For the awakened eye, the illusions that once masqueraded as love no longer wield their former power. Where before you might have sworn you had discovered your missing half, you now perceive a human being, whole and complete, with their unique joys and their own shadows. The captivating illusion of imagining them as your savior, your ultimate completion, begins to dissipate. And with this clearer vision, the old spell of romance no longer sweeps you off your feet with the same irresistible force. What once felt like an all-consuming fire now seems like transient smoke. Cravings that once appeared irresistible now feel flimsy, akin to paper boats adrift on an expansive ocean. The thrill of the chase, the drama of patient waiting, the agony of uncertainty, all these elements now appear faintly absurd when juxtaposed against the profound stillness and inner peace you've cultivated within yourself. It's not that these experiences are despised. Rather, they are simply no longer mistaken for authentic. Once it becomes clear that the entire affair is a kind of theatrical production, it's very difficult to continue pretending it's a matter of life and death seriousness. Of course, one can still appreciate the performance, the laughter, the tears, the tender embraces, but it is now understood as theater, not the ultimate truth of existence. Consequently, what the world calls romance begins to lose its pervasive glamour. The awakened individual does not cease to love, but the illusions that once defined that love collapse. The game, once approached with deadly seriousness, is now revealed as precisely that, a game. And with this profound recognition, you step out of the trance and into a realm of infinitely greater spaciousness and authenticity. Once you have truly tasted awakening, the very essence and texture of love undergoes a radical transformation. You no longer carry that familiar, gnawing hunger to be completed by another, because you now understand deeply and intuitively that no external entity can fulfill you in that way. You are already whole, intrinsically formed by the same life force that brought you into being. And it is this very wholeness that renders the old way of falling in love so challenging. For what fueled it before was not fullness, but emptiness. It was the persistent ache of loneliness, the deep-seated fear of being unseen or unacknowledged, that lent such a powerful fire to traditional romance. But when you awaken, that fire no longer burns in the same manner. You are no longer pursuing someone to mend a perceived hole in your heart, for that hole, through self-discovery and acceptance, is now recognized as never having truly existed. And so, the old dramas, which once felt so intoxicating, now feel strangely hollow. The emotional storms that once seemed exciting and passionate now appear as mere nonsense when you have discovered the profound, unshakable calm of the deep sea within yourself. This shift in perspective is not merely intellectual. It is an embodied transformation that redefines the very landscape of human connection. You also begin to notice how much of ordinary romance is predicated on a form of willing blindness. The subtle lies we tell ourselves, the convenient illusions we eagerly embrace. Awakening systematically strips away these blindfolds. You see with too much clarity the hidden bargains beneath the fervent vows, the ego's cunning tricks, and the underlying fears masquerading as profound devotion. And once you truly see, you cannot unsee. Love that is fundamentally rooted in the fear of being alone simply has no fertile ground left to grow within you. And then there is another truth, perhaps even harder to embrace. Awakening inherently raises the standard of your heart's desires. You no longer measure love by fleeting charm, superficial beauty, or even clever intellectual compatibility. Without conscious effort, you find yourself drawn towards something far deeper, a profound resonance, an authentic connection, an understanding that transcends mere appearances and touches the very core of your being. In this new landscape, the crowd of potential partners noticeably thins out. Where once the world seemed full of romantic possibilities, suddenly there are only a very select few. For it is genuinely rare to encounter someone who has similarly navigated their own internal shadows and emerged awake on the other side. Most are still engaged in the old game, following the established scripts. This is precisely why it feels almost impossible to fall in love in the old way. Not because you are incapable of love, but because you are no longer capable of pretense. You cannot revert to confusing desperate need with genuine love, dramatic flair with authentic passion, or mere attachment with true devotion. You have simply outgrown these patterns, much like one outgrows the games of childhood. And although this transition may, at times, bring a pang of melancholy, a longing for the deceptive simplicity of old intoxications, you would not, under any circumstances, trade back. For you now possess a depth of knowledge and insight that is far too precious to relinquish. This intellectual understanding and emotional maturity fundamentally reshape your approach to relationships. While all this sounds very profound and liberating in theory, the idea that you are now whole, free, and no longer confuse superficial hunger with deep love. There is another, often challenging facet to this story. When the familiar intoxications of conventional romance no longer move you, you do not immediately step into a state of perpetual bliss. The transition, the gap between the old and the new, can be profoundly painful. There arises a deep, pervasive sense of standing apart, as though you no longer quite belong to the world in which you once navigated so effortlessly. This isn't loneliness in the conventional sense. You may be surrounded by friends, companions, and even admirers. Yet there is a sharper, more penetrating kind of solitude. The quiet, often unarticulated recognition that very few people are truly capable of meeting you at the profound depth you now inhabit. And should you attempt to revert to old patterns, to pretend you can still participate in the charade, it rings hollow, producing an unbearable dissonance. You simply cannot unknow what you now know. Accompanying this solitude is a subtle fear, a fear that perhaps the world, as it currently operates, will never quite align with this newfound appetite for truth, that the number of individuals who truly resonate will remain profoundly small, and that you will continue to carry your profound sense of wholeness into rooms where no one else has learned to hold such expansive space. Here, Loneliness is not merely the petty absence of company, but the profound, almost existential solitude of being understood by a very select few. This is precisely why the search for love feels impossible to the awakened. It is not because love itself has vanished, but because your eyes have become too clear, too discerning. You cannot fall in love in the way you used to, and sometimes that piercing clarity feels more like an unwelcome exile than a joyful enlightenment. This journey parallels the experiences of individuals who have undergone significant personal growth or trauma recovery, often finding their social circles shrinking as they evolve beyond old dynamics. Psychologists often note that as individuals become more self-aware and integrated, their criteria for meaningful connection naturally shifts, leading to fewer but deeper relationships. It's a natural pruning process, albeit one that can feel isolating in the moment. Consequently, those who are awakened carry a quiet, unwavering wish in their hearts. They would rather walk alone, anchored in truth, than be bound within the comforting confines of an illusion. They refuse to bargain away their hard-won inner peace for fleeting comfort, nor will they step back into the elaborate theater of half-loves and ego-driven games. They have seen through the trick of it, the dazzling blaze that captivates for a moment, only to collapse into smoke and cinders, leaving behind a residue of unfulfillment. The true wish of the awakened is not for the old, feverish passion, but for something infinitely simpler, quieter, and more genuine. Love, if and when it arrives for the awakened, undergoes a complete shift in its center of gravity. It transforms from grasping and demanding to unconditional giving, from the melodrama of relentless pursuit to the profound stillness of authentic presence. It must manifest as clean, unmasked, unforced, and truly free. It is not sought as a rescue from inner turmoil, nor as a means of possession, but as the serene meeting of two individuals who are already whole, choosing to share their intrinsic freedom with one another. Anything less than this would feel like a sleepwalking of the soul, a regression into the very patterns they have transcended. And no amount of borrowed warmth or fleeting companionship is worth the spiritual price of closing one's eyes to truth again. There is no clinging in this new paradigm, only the expansive joy of sharing. There are no bargaining demands, but a spontaneous delight that requires no external justification. It is love stripped bare of all theatrical embellishment, yet filled with a spaciousness and depth that the old stage of conventional romance could never contain. This is the silent aspiration they hold, though they seldom articulate it aloud. Their longing is not for a love that consumes and diminishes, but for one that expands and liberates. Not a love that binds and restricts, but one that frees and elevates. They find solace in the conviction that the solitude of clarity is infinitely preferable to the company of illusion. They choose to wait, even if that waiting spans an entire lifetime, rather than surrender to the intoxicating, yet ultimately unfulfilling, hypnosis of the past. For once the eyes of awareness have truly opened, inner peace itself becomes a treasure far too precious to be gambled away. Peace is not some consolation prize, it is the ultimate treasure itself. The profound stillness that has been discovered within is immeasurably richer than any of the turbulent storms that were once mislabeled as passion. The old fire, all sparks and ephemeral noise, now seems like a child's fleeting game compared to the quiet, steady flame of wholeness that requires no external fuel. And why indeed? Would one trade the enduring warmth of self-sufficiency for the feverish incompleteness of a dependent relationship? When one chooses to live in this manner, the circle of companions inevitably grows sparse. It may be a very long time before you encounter another soul who has successfully slipped out of the same hypnotic trance. Such meetings are, by their very nature, exceedingly rare. But then, what is a diamond if not rare? Its scarcity is precisely what constitutes its immense worth. So, the awakened carry this silent vow, whether articulated or not. It is better to stand alone in the unwavering light of clarity than to kneel once again before the fleeting shadows of illusion. For to pretend, to re-enter the old game, would be to betray the profound gift that awakening has bestowed upon them. And so they wait, not in despair or resignation, but in profound patience, understanding that a real, authentic meeting is a rare occurrence, and therefore immeasurably precious. It is a strange and beautiful gift, this awakening, at once a profound freedom and a poignant solitude. The awakened individual would rather face the long, quiet silence of self-sufficiency than the distracting noise of counterfeit loves. They will wait as long as it takes, even if it means an entire lifetime. For it signifies that when true love does eventually arrive, it will not be born from an aching hunger for completion, but from an overflowing fullness of being, not from a place of fear or insecurity, but from a wellspring of intrinsic freedom. And that particular kind of love, though rare, is the only love that possesses the depth and authenticity to truly last. You no longer seek to be completed by another, for you recognize yourself as already whole and complete. You do not beg for permanence, for you have learned the universal truth that all things are in constant motion, fluid and transient. And because there is no underlying bargain, there is no cage, no prison of expectation. You can freely choose to stay or freely choose to go, and the essence of love remains unchained, free, and expansive. This transcendent love is not about rescue, nor is it about possession. It is, fundamentally, about the pure joy of presence. Two beings who are not fragmented halves frantically searching for their missing counterparts, but individuals who are already whole and therefore able to share their lives without fear, without clinging, and without the burdensome weight of expectation. When you no longer demand that love rescue you from yourself, you are, paradoxically, finally free to give love in its purest form. When you no longer insist that another complete you, you can meet them as they truly are, stripped of fantasy and free from the role of a savior, recognizing them instead as a fellow traveler on the mysterious journey of existence. This is precisely why the awakened do not fall in love in the conventional sense. Instead, they rise in it. They are not dragged down by the gravitational pull of longing or attachment, but are lifted into a state of expansive freedom. And when love is no longer experienced as a prison of need and expectation, it becomes what it always was at its very root, the purest, most unadulterated expression of life itself. When you are no longer enslaved by the desperate need to be loved, you discover that you are, in fact, freer to love than ever before, with an authenticity and generosity that transforms both your own life and the lives of those you touch.